The experience of transition itself is fundamentally delightful. I cannot explain the magic. Hi there, I'm Sophie. I'm a transgender YouTuber, essayist, and activist, and I'm going to answer your questions today about trans topics and issues. How can the British media do a more effective job of reporting on trans issues and holding transphobia to account? The fundamental problem is that the British media is actually stacked against trans people in a very similar way to the way that it's been stacked against immigrants, Muslims. Before that, it was against gay men and lesbians. In fact, it's a very similar way to that. A lot of the same exact talking points, trying to describe trans people as perverts, describing us as a danger to children. This is a perfect example of the way that the British media operates to demonize different sections of the population in order to distract from the failings of our government and distract from any kind of actual, meaningful discussion of the structural failures in our society. Usually, whenever trans people are given a platform to speak in the British media, you look into the person for 5 seconds and you find out actually this is a person who within the trans community is well known for being a trans person who hates trans people. You are smart enough to understand that that would not be good journalism and honest reporting and helpful to the state of our society in general. So the main thing you can do is actually interviewing regular, ordinary trans people who don't espouse horrific conservative reactionary talking points. That's a huge step in the right direction. And that's the main thing you can do. Get trans people to talk about trans issues. What can cis people do to elevate the voices of trans creators / activists in online spaces? So first of all, just in case people don't know, cis is short for cisgender. It refers to someone who isn't trans. Cis is a Latin prefix which means on the same side of, whereas trans means crossing over. Whenever there are trans issues going on, whenever there are attacks on trans people are usually talking about it, and viewers will be more biased in favor of cisgender people because, unfortunately, there is this cognitive bias people experience. When a minoritized group speaks about their own experience and their own issues, often people think they have a bias. And so one thing that cis people can do is just share trans people's voices, just share directly. And that doesn't just go for cis people who are in an audience who want to share with their friends, although absolutely you should do that. But also cis people who have a platform, people who have a big audience themselves. If cisgender allies wanted to share and elevate and uplift the voices of trans creators about trans issues, they can just hit that share button. Besides that, cis people can also try to turn to your cisgender friend or uncle or whatever and say, hey, there's this stuff going on right now. There are these attacks in the media and there are these rising hate crimes and there are these issues and these issues. That person's then more likely to want to listen and then is more likely to be able to listen to trans people talking about our own topics. How do you deal with navigating online negativity? The internet is poisoned against good news. And in a lot of cases, social media is designed to just throw as much negativity at you as possible. I, for one, have found that Twitter is basically unusable if you don't change your notifications to only people that you follow. You need to shut out a lot of people because a lot of people suck, but way, way more people are fab and great and lovely. But Twitter, Facebook, YouTube are all designed around encouraging rage clicks and hate clicks and anger and arguments because it gets them more engagement. And so you have to actively fight it. And so one thing that minoritized people do a lot of the time is just have to block out a lot of other people, and then you have a good time just chatting with your friends online and not listening to some random Brian from Swindon who's decided to make your genitals his business. That's really all I can say. What can we as trans / genderqueer people do to minimize infighting and focus on the actually important goal of human rights? There's a concept I encourage you to look up which is called moral injury, which is rather than feeling like you personally have been wronged, you feel like the way that the world should be has been violated by someone's actions. You feel like what someone has done is against how a perfect world would be. And that's the kind of reaction that we see from people when they're going after someone for getting something a bit wrong. And that's because we can all see the world is pretty messed up in a bunch of ways, and we want to do something about it, which is a valid and good emotional response, and it's not being channeled in particularly helpful ways. So what I would say more than anything else is to find something healthy and constructive to do with your time. And if you want it to be in the trans community, absolutely do that. Our history has been systemically erased across hundreds of years by bigots. If you want to do something useful with your time, be a historian. Just go and research trans histories and expose the beautiful, joyful stories of trans people from the past. That's something you can do. Or you can build together to fight issues and organize together with other trans people. Occupying your time with something else is the main thing that will stop you from infighting with other trans people. I feel the general public gets an image of trans people as perpetually suffering, but I want to hear about positive trans experiences. What are some positive aspects or experiences of your transition that you'd like to share? How do I explain this to cisgender people who haven't gone through it themselves? You know when you move into a place and it has some furniture in it and it just doesn't feel like you properly live there, like you feel like you're gonna have to move out again, like it's just not furnished for you. And sometimes it's too much, sometimes it's really just depressing. But then you get a raise or you get a promotion, you get a bit more money and you decide, I'm gonna redecorate. And you get in all the stuff that's like yours. And you get a new sofa and a new bed and a new work desk and all this stuff. And you're like, yeah, I live here. This is my house. The experience of transition itself is fundamentally delightful. I cannot explain the magic. The magic is the best word of realizing who you are and then becoming that person. And especially when you start HRT and you wake up every day and you're just slightly more the person that you always knew you were. I have a mirror in my bedroom, I wake up, I sit up in my bed and I see myself, and every day I'm a little bit more Sophie. How can I tell if I'm NB? I've always felt pretty uncomfortable with masculinity in general, but I don't really have dysphoria. What was your journey in discovering yourself like? Try to define woman or man without mentioning genitals and without talking about like the color pink or blue or something, right? It's like, actually gender is a really weird and messy thing. But for me, I started hanging out with more trans people and I saw some non-binary people who identified as non-binary, used they, them pronouns, didn't like to be, called he, him, but just presented like a dude. Like you just look at someone and you'd be like, oh, that's a dude, that's a guy. And for me, that was a moment where I was like, well, I've never really felt very comfortable with masculinity and I've always had this weird relationship to it. Yeah, maybe I want to use they, them pronouns. And when I kind of stepped back and took a look at things for myself, I really realized how deeply uncomfortable I'd been for a really long time. And it gave me the space to realize that actually I wanted to make bigger changes and start presenting feminine in my day-to-day life and in public and with my friends and everything. You might be one of the people I'm describing who still presents in an overall masculine way, but just prefers they, them pronouns. You might like to be masculine but wear a little bit of makeup and polish your nails, or you might be like me and identify actually as a woman ultimately, but still identify also with being non-binary. People are complex and fun, and it's interesting to learn about different people's experiences, and you have to find it for yourself. So don't take my experience too much as any kind of guide, because only you can answer questions about yourself. How should we educate on issues that affect the LGBTQ+ community more effectively in places like school or work? In Britain, there was a thing called Section 28, which only ended in the 2000s. And actually made it illegal to promote homosexuality. What this actually meant was that it was illegal to talk to kids about gay people, to just like acknowledge gay people existed. You really just should tell kids gay people exist and trans people exist, and educate them about the basic facts. If they feel like, hey, that's something I'm kind of interested in, I want to learn more about that, they will do it for themselves at some point. And then the most important thing that you can do is not try to stop them when they come to you and say, hey, the reason I was really, really, really interested in gay stuff, or really, really, really interested in making trans friends and learning about trans stuff, is because I'm gay or because I'm trans. Don't push back on them at that point. That's the most important thing like a parent, a teacher can do. In the workplace, things are a little different because fundamentally you are just trying to exist in a professional environment. In a lot of cases, no one really wants to be there. You'd rather be having some beers with the lads. There are just things that, and they're honestly pretty common sense and just basically respectful. And you will find that practically everyone is happy and patient with you if you don't quite get it, and only gets annoyed if you're really being a bit of a dick. Trans healthcare is often not talked about. What health issues are affecting the trans community, and what are the solutions? There's a broad spread issue with trans healthcare in the UK, and that's that for the rest of the country, for cisgender people, we have free healthcare that is informed consent. It's just easy to access. You go to someone and you say, hey, I think I've got this issue, and they check you out, and then you get the medication. Cis people can access some of the same medications that trans people access in that way that you'd expect through the NHS. For example, postmenopausal cisgender women get hormone therapy, estrogen. Balding cis men get literally some of the same drugs to treat balding that trans women are on, because those drugs suppress testosterone levels, and that's what trans women want. Only if you're a trans woman and you want that drug, you have to go through psychological evaluation, recommendations from specialists, a visit to an endocrinologist, and most crucially, the NHS waitlist has been deliberately targeted and shut down and deliberately slowed by people who don't want people to transition, so that now if people join the waitlist today, they'll have to wait up to 5 or 6 years before they can access that medication. Cis people can just get this from one appointment with their doctor. Trans people die waiting for life-saving medicine. That is medical segregation, and that is a really, really serious issue that's facing us right now. There are other health issues that face the trans community, like trans people as a group have an endemic vitamin D deficiency because we don't get enough sunshine, because people keep yelling at us in the street and being generally unpleasant, and it makes it kind of hard to go outside. Another issue is like trans people, especially trans masc people, experience a lot of UTIs because of a fear of going into public bathrooms because of all of the media circus and storm around trans people in public bathrooms. What we can do about it is tackling the bigotry in our society in both of those last two cases, and yeah, largely in the first one as well. It is just bigotry. It is just a deep, unpleasant, reactionary tendency in people who are trying to stop people from being trans, who are trying to force us out of public life. And the thing about trans people is we just are trans, and we always have been, and there is writing in Ovid and other like ancient Greek texts about trans people. We've always been here, but our history has been systemically erased. It's a naturally occurring human thing to be trans, and when you stop someone from being able to access the healthcare that they need, you're just making their life unlivable. You're not making them not be trans. You're just making them miserable. What brings you joy as a trans person in this freaking day and age? Primarily other trans people. Most of my friends are trans. You know, it's a thing that happens. You're interested in trans stuff because of some reason. And so you make friends with a lot of trans people, and you realize what the reason was, and it turns out you're trans, so you transition. And then you just have a lot of trans friends, and you have common experiences that you can chat about and share and relate over. And I think trans people are inspiring and wonderful, and I already talked about this. I think the experience of being trans is magical. It uplifts me and inspires me to see trans people living their lives and being themselves and finding the joy that I've found every day. And besides that, video games. Love them. They're great. It's really cool. There's so many cool video games out there. Did you know? Maybe I should get outside more, get that vitamin D. How did you get to be so cool? It's called estradiol valerate, and I take 8 milligrams a day. Thank you. That's very nice to say. As an autistic individual, traditional ideas about gender have always been really weird to me. Same. So I ask a lot. And it would be cool if you could talk about what kind of things you shouldn't ask trans folks. I don't want to be the stereotypical annoying cis. Don't ask us about our genitals. If you're pestering people about their genitals, that's rude under any context. And that should be fairly obvious to people, I hope. and yet I still receive, you know, just strangers talking about my genitals all the time, and that's horrid, and people shouldn't have to go through that. But I think the thing that's a real guide here, if you're unsure, is that the context is your relationship to the trans person that you're asking the questions of. If it's someone who has dedicated their time to educating people, right now I'm answering your question, you know, I've chosen to do that, then I'm happy to answer questions, and I will continue to do throughout this video. But a lot of people don't want to be asked those questions. If someone's just like working the till at Tesco or on a TV show or something, you know, like all sorts of different jobs, and they're just trying to live their lives, they don't necessarily want to be bombarded with questions. If they're a friend of yours, they're probably going to be a lot more happy to answer any questions you have. And in fact, with a friend, they're going to be a lot more happy to answer some of the more personal questions that you shouldn't ask a stranger. Thanks for all your questions. I am Sophie, and I'm Sophie, like gamer, but with a they, get it? On Twitter and on Twitch, where I stream video games. I'm also Curio on YouTube and Curio Vids on Patreon, and that's the important one because it pays the bills. I do media analysis video essays on YouTube, and I also have a podcast called Rolling with Rainbows, where I play tabletop games like Call of Cthulhu and Cyberpunk and stuff like that. And so if any of that is your jam, please check me out. Patreon.com/CurioVids, Rolling with Rainbows, Sophie.